Welcome everybody. Thanks for the intro, Robin. As Robin said, I'm a partner at Snell and Wilmer. I do exclusively employment law and employer side employment law specifically. And I don't know about you all, but basically since March 12th, my life has been nothing but coronavirus related employment questions. So I've been fielding these nonstop for clients of all different sizes, all different industries. And it's been rough. So, maybe we can take a deep breath, appreciate that given that we are all on this webinar, it means that we're all still working and presumably healthy. I know there are many others who can't say the same right now. And I call his presentation today's frequently asked employment law questions. And the emphasis is on today because the information and guidance and orders that we are getting, they're changing literally by the minute. We will issue a client alert based on some guidance that we got from the DOL, and then overnight they've changed it and we have to issue new guidance the next day. So it's crazy time. And during the meeting, I'm happy to provide general guidance but because of the rules that I'm bound by, I can't provide specific legal advice to those of you that aren't clients. But I did get some questions in advance that I've incorporated into the presentation. So hopefully, I hit all the high points of what you all are looking for. So the three main topics that we'll cover have to do with working from home, pay issues relating to time off, including the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and then furloughs and layoffs and the WARN Act. So jumping onto the first topic, what are some of the questions that we get about working from home and some tips that I can offer? First, if working from home is not something that you want to go back to after all of this is over, you don't want to set a precedent for that, and you do want people to physically come back to work when this is all over, I recommend that you clearly state in any of the notices that you send out to your employees that the teleworking arrangement is temporary and for these emergency purposes only. One thing that is surprising is that employees can still make workers' comp claims for work-related injuries that occur at home. So, think about that for a minute and the complications that can come of that. If an employee claims that she hurt her back while working from home, are you sure that that's what happened? Or could she have hurt her back while she was, chasing around her kids who were supposed to be, doing their school from home at the same time? So that's just something to think about, and it'll be your workers' comp carrier that helps really investigate those sort of things, but it is a complicating factor. And it's possible that an employee may claim, if you are still having employees working together, that they contracted the virus from a coworker. And if that happens, it's possible that you'll have workers' comp coverage for that. And frankly, you'd rather it be covered and handled through the workers' comp process than in a civil suit. So should you have an employee make that claim that, oh, I have COVID-19 and I have it because my coworker gave it to me at work, then I recommend that you give them the workers' comp claim form and let the comp adjuster kind of run with that. When employees are working from home, the normal wage and hour laws still apply to them, and you should still enforce your attendance policies. So hourly employees must still track their time worked. They have to take their meal periods and their rest breaks, and they have to record their meal periods. If they happen to work overtime, so over 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week, they still get paid for that time. And then another real tricky area is that you need to consider what expenses an employee incurs while teleworking. In California, employees must be reimbursed for their reasonable and necessary expenses that are incurred as a result of their work. So this extends to employees who are teleworking. So think about the cell phone, the internet. Now the test is that it's reasonable and necessary. So, this wouldn't be the time for an employee to claim, oh, I've got to get some super expensive printer, and now you're going to foot the bill for that. You don't have to approve that. But even when an employee has like an unlimited cell phone plan, courts in California have found that the employer has to reimburse the employee for a reasonable amount of that. The figure that I see a lot of employers use is like $50 a month for the phone. You can still have employees follow your regular expense reimbursement policy in practice. So if you have employees saying, you know, yeah, I need to use my phone, I need to use my home internet, have them submit their regular expense reimbursement form and process that like you normally would. If they need backup, you can ask for backup and treat it like a regular expense. Another question that's coming up is, what if we're actually hiring right now? How do we do that? How do we do the onboarding process if everyone's working from home? So employers can do the onboarding process via Zoom or FaceTime or something like that. And you can have documents docu-signed. You don't need wet signatures. You can have an electronic signature. And even with respect to I-9s, the Department of Homeland Security issued new guidelines that you can find on their website, which basically state that if you have no employees on site, you're not required to review the employee's identity and the employment authorization documents in the employee's physical presence. So there's a process that you can go through if you're hiring a new employee and you need to do that I-9 process, and there's physically nobody at the office to handle that. So those are the main questions that I see on the working from home topic, and we'll transition then to the second topic, which is what about when people aren't working, or if they need to take time off or they're choosing to take time off? What is it that we have to pay for as the employer? So even before all of this craziness, many states and cities have their own pre-existing paid sick leave laws. In California, it's 24 hours annually. In some locations like LA and San Diego, it's more than that. So the regular sick leave laws are still in place. Those have not changed, and you should have already had that as part of your policies. And then again, before all of this, the general rule that still applies is for an exempt worker. So an employee who is exempt from overtime, who earns a salary, that employee must be paid for a full week if they perform any work during that week. And you can only make a salary deduction if the employee is paid a corresponding amount from either PTO or sick or vacation. So if no work is done in a work week, you don't have to pay the salary for that week. Where I've seen this come up recently is when the employer says, we just don't have any more work this week. You know, it's Tuesday at 4 o'clock and there's nothing else to do, so we're just going to send our employees home, or we're going to have them stop, teleworking at this point. For your exempt employees, they have worked up until now, they get paid their full work week. So if you're thinking about that possibility, consider the timing of that. It doesn't really do you any good to do that midweek. You can do it prospectively for the next week. So you could pay them all this week and say, next week, don't come in. We're not going to have any work. Don't do any work. And if they actually don't do any work, then you don't have to pay them for that full week. For non-exempt hourly workers, the rule's different. For them, they only need to be paid for the hours actually worked. There's something called reporting time pay in California, which can kick in if they report to work and they're only working for 2 hours, and you think, okay, we're going to send this person home. We don't have enough work today, so we send them home. That employee would still be entitled to basically half of their regular shift, or 4 hours of pay, even though they only work 2 hours. So again, when you're planning on possibly sending non-exempt employees home or telling non-exempt employees not to do any further work, consider doing that at the end of the shift so you don't incur any reporting time pay issues. So these are all the general rules that have been in place even prior to what we're dealing with now. And what is new and what has a lot of questions surrounding it is this Families First Act. So this is the federal legislation that requires some employers to pay emergency family medical leave and provide emergency paid sick time. It starts tomorrow, April 1st is when it comes into effect and when employers have to start following it. Right now, if you haven't already, you must post a notice which was provided by the Department of Labor. And if people aren't coming to work, there isn't really a place to post it anymore. You're emailing it to employees is also fine, or putting it up on some sort of, if you have an intranet or something like that, will satisfy your posting requirements as well. The Department of Labor has published a list of frequently asked questions that are really helpful, and those can answer some of the individual questions that may have been posed before this webinar. If I don't get to them right now, I would encourage you to take a look at those. I think they're up to 59 frequently asked questions. When they first came out last week, there was like 14, and then they keep adding more and more as we start realizing there's kind of holes in this, or more employers are needing explanation for things. So the website, if you haven't had occasion to visit it already, where you can find the notice and where you can find the frequently asked questions, it's the Department of Labor's website, and that address is www.dol.gov/agencies/WHD/pandemic. There's a lot of really helpful information on that website regarding the Families First Act. So kind of what are the key elements of the Family First Act? So it applies to employers that have less than 500 employees, and employers that have less than 50 employees may be exempted from part of it. So if you have more than 50 but under 500 employees, it's definitely going to apply to you. If you have fewer than 50 employees, you may be exempt from part of it, and the part that you may be exempt from is the part that allows for leave to be taken when an employee's child's school or daycare or childcare is closed or unavailable. The sick leave component is something that you will still have to provide, even if you have fewer than 50 employees. So the frequently asked questions that are published by the Department of Labor address, how was it that we decide whether or not we meet the qualifications to be exempt if we have under 50 employees. And it's the FAQ 58 and 59 specifically are the ones that you should look at. So basically, if an authorized officer of the business has determined, I'm going to paraphrase it and not read them exactly, that providing the paid leave is going to cause the business to cease operating at a minimal capacity. So basically, if you just don't have the funds to do it, that's one way to claim that you're exempt. And another way is if there are employees that are requesting the paid sick leave, and if those employees aren't working for you, it's a substantial risk to your operational capabilities, and basically so you can't function without these employees. And then finally, there just aren't enough workers. You have so few employees that if any, one or two or three of them take this leave, again, you can't operate at a minimal capacity. So if this is something that you think might apply to you, I would say go to that FAQ 58 on the Department of Labor's website and look at that a little bit more closely. So assuming that the Families First Act does apply to you, what are the types of paid leave that are required under that act? There are two types. One is the emergency family leave, which is 10 weeks leave that's paid. It's the first 2 weeks, so 12 weeks total. The first 2 weeks are unpaid. The remaining 10 weeks are paid, and that's only available for one reason. It's only available for an employee who cannot work or cannot telework because their child's school or daycare or childcare is unavailable. So when you're thinking about that type of leave, you only need to think about those employees who have children, who are not able to go to school or not able to go to their daycare, have their childcare. So that again is 10 weeks of paid leave, and it's paid at 2/3 of the employee's normal rate of pay and up to $200 a day or $12,000 total for each employee. The employee has to be employed for 30 days in order to get this leave. So if you had just hired someone, they wouldn't be entitled to this leave. They need to have been employed for 30 days before they could get this leave. I know that there was a question that was submitted about a situation where, you know, both parents work for the same employer. The Act does not address that point. And so far, the frequently asked questions do not address that point. But this could be an example of, you know, more guidance that is to come, because we know that under the regular Family Medical Leave Act, if you have two parents working for the same employer, the parents split the baby bonding time under the FMLA. So there's 12 weeks available, and that could be split between the two parents as opposed to having 24 weeks available to the two parents. So hopefully something similar will apply here, but they just haven't addressed it yet. So that's the family leave component of Families First. And then there's also a paid sick leave component. The paid sick leave component provides for 80 hours of pay for the 80 hours time off and pay for the employee that, you know, think about this type of leave when you're actually dealing with an illness. So the employee is subject to a quarantine or isolation order. And one of the questions that comes up is, you know, the order that we're all under here right now in California, does that count? And the answer to that is no. It's a quarantine or isolation order is an order that's issued specific to an employee or a person, I should say, who's sick or who's showing symptoms. It's not just the generalized order that we all are under right now to stay home as best we can. It applies when the employee has been advised to self-quarantine by a healthcare provider, when the employee has symptoms and is seeking a diagnosis. They can also have this leave. And it's also available when the employee is caring for an individual, not just a family member, but an individual in any of those same situations. So an individual that's subject to an isolation or self-quarantine order or has symptoms and is seeking diagnosis. If they're caring for someone in those situations, the employee can also get that pay. And then finally, it's available for the same reason as the family medical leave component of the Act. So when the child's school or daycare is closed, you can also get these 80 hours. Now, the paid sick leave hours are paid at a different rate than the FMLA. It's capped at $511 a day if it's for any of the personal reasons. So if the employee, him or herself, is sick or under a self-quarantine order, and it's at a lower rate, $200 a day, if it's capped at $200 a day if the employee is caring for another person. And any employee can get this type of leave. You're not required to have been employed for 30 days to get this type of leave. So when you look at these two types of leave together, the employee can use the paid sick leave to cover the first 2 weeks of the 12 weeks of family medical leave and effectively get some sort of pay for the whole 12-week period. Employers get a tax credit for what they pay out under this Act. I looked at the IRS's website today to see if we had the guidelines yet on how what that's going to look like, how you're going to apply, what documents you're going to need. And they have yet to publish that. They said it's supposed to be out sometime this week. But I would recommend that you talk to your CPA about how you apply for that tax credit if you end up having to provide this type of leave for your employees. So that's kind of the overview of the Families First Act, but there are other types of government provided wage replacement. So the Family First Act is something that's paid for by the employer, and you can get the tax credit for it, but you pay out of pocket for that. And then there are other types of government provided wage replacement that could be available to your employees for a variety of different reasons. The resource that I would direct you to in California, where you can get more information on that, is another website. And that website is www.labor.ca.gov/coronavirus2019 /. And that is the Labor and Workforce Development Department has put together a lot of information all in one place. So you can get links to the EDD and get more information about what resources might be available to your employees. So unemployment may be available. There were some changes to this CARES Act, the Stimulus Act that came out that may change things regarding unemployment, and employees might be able to get more than we originally thought, but there might be some strings attached to that. So we're kind of waiting to get some more guidance on that Stimulus Act before we know for sure what this is going to look like. But my advice to you as an employer is to just tell the employee that, you know, they can contact the EDD, they can apply for unemployment, and you're not in a position as to give them any advice, frankly, as to whether or not they're going to get it, how much they're going to get, any of those details. So employees who are furloughed, who are laid off, and we'll talk about what those two things mean later, whose hours are reduced, whose pay is reduced, there's the potential for them to make some of that up by filing for unemployment. And there was a question about whether there's kind of a penalty or what impact that has on the employers now. And right now, it doesn't impact you, and there's no penalty, and there's no penalty later. There will be basically effect on your kind of quote unquote premiums eventually when there are, you know, more claims made on your account. There was a question about whether, you know, it's better to continue to pay employees or allow employees to collect unemployment. Generally speaking, if you have the ability to continue to pay your employees and pay them at their full rate, that's going to be better than what they get through unemployment. Even with the new additions that we're hoping are going to be available through the Stimulus Act. And that includes possibly independent contractors being able to collect unemployment, possibly no waiting period for the unemployment, you know, unemployment being available for these gig economy workers. So we're hoping that it's as enhanced as it's being billed to be right now, but we're not quite sure. One of the programs that's available through the EDD is a work sharing program. When you are reducing employees' hours and reducing their pay, it's a very paper-intensive process that requires you to fill out forms and physically snail mail them to the EDD and wait for them to come back. And from what I understand from employers is some of them are just not bothering with that, instead allowing employees to just file directly for unemployment because it's faster. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I've heard. There is more information on the work sharing program on the EDD's website, which you can get to from that Labor California site, which I provided earlier. So an employee who is sick might be able to recover disability insurance. So state disability insurance is something that might be available to employees. And then employees who are caring for a family member who's sick might also be able to get the paid family leave benefits through the state. So those are the types of benefits that are available from the state and with some federal support as well. And these are benefits that, again, you as the employer aren't paying directly out of pocket for. Okay, so you know, that kind of covers the time off aspect of what we're dealing with right now. So what about if we're at a point where, you know, we have to lay off employees, there's just no work, or we have to furlough employees? It's not a matter of just cutting back a little bit on hours or pay, but instead, you know, we have to either shut down operations completely or very significantly. When it comes to having to do furloughs or layoffs, you know, you hear a lot about the term furlough right now, and there is no exact legal definition of what is a furlough. Basically, a furlough is when you reduce the days or weeks or maybe even months that an employee works with the intention of bringing the employee back. So that's how it really differs than a layoff. And some people like it better because the messaging is better. It's, you're just being furloughed. You know, when this is all over, we'll automatically bring you back. If you don't know whether you intend to bring employees back, I think one of the questions touched on this, or whether you're going to want to bring employees back, calling it a layoff rather than a furlough is definitely a better option. So, you know, you might think of this as an opportune time to do some house cleaning. You know, if you have some problem employees, not everyone, but layoffs are becoming quite the norm right now, and they aren't surprising. And if your work has severely dried up, then this may be a good time to go ahead and do layoffs and throw in there some of the problem headache type of employees that you have. When you do a furlough, it's possible under your insurance plan that you can continue the insurance coverage for the employee. That's very plan specific. So I would advise that you talk to your broker and look at your individual plan to see if that's a possibility. It's clear that when an employee is laid off, they can't stay on their regular benefits, and instead you can COBRA them out. But it's possible under some plans that you can have benefits continuation when you call it a furlough as opposed to a layoff. When an employee is furloughed or laid off, again, we talked about the possibility of getting unemployment insurance. That's possibly available for both situations, not just a layoff. And one thing that was made clear by the guidance, by the frequently asked questions that came out on the family's first leave, is that you do not have to provide that leave to employees who are doing no work. If they're on a furlough status and their hours are reduced, they could be entitled to that leave. If they're on a furlough status and they're doing no work, or if they are laid off, the employee is not entitled to that leave. Last week, a lot of employers were kind of scrambling, thinking, oh gosh, do we need to lay off employees now? Because we don't know if we're going to have to provide this leave to them if they're still employed on April 1st. And it was clear that if you're employed on April 1st, that yes, you're entitled to the family's first leave. If subsequent to April 1st, you either are furloughed and are doing no work or are laid off, you are not entitled to that leave. It's not something that employee can just throw out there as a way to save their job, basically. In California, when you do either a furlough or a layoff, you still have to pay all accrued and unused PTO and all final wages on the last day of work. That's not the case in other states, but in California, that's definitely the case. So if you're considering a furlough or a layoff, be ready to have a check in hand on the last day of work to give that to your employees. The one thing that comes up a lot when people are talking about layoffs, talking about furloughs, is this WARN Act. You hear this term thrown out of the WARN Act. So, okay, what is the WARN Act? The WARN Act, it's WARN, and it stands for the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. There's a federal version and a state version. We'll talk about the state version here, and frankly, the state version is more restrictive. So if you comply with the state version, you're probably going to be fine under the federal version as well. And there's no exceptions, for nonprofits. Unfortunately, you're still subject to the WARN Act. So when do you have to think about the WARN Act? In California, you need to pay attention if you have employed 75 employees at a covered establishment, so one location. If you have had 75 employees at one location in the last 12 months, and you include in that calculation part-time employees, you even include in that calculation temporary employees. But you can exclude from that someone who has worked less than 6 months for you. So the first cut is to look at, going back over 12 months, have you had 75 employees, part-time and temp? And then if you've hit that number, then you can look at, all right, is there anyone we can take off this list because they've been here less than 6 months? If so, maybe that drops you down below 75 employees. So if you have employed 75 employees at a covered establishment and you are shutting down that location, or if you are having, the language is a substantial cessation of operations, or if you are laying off 50 employees or furloughing 50 employees, then you have, it's called triggered warn. And it's nothing to freak out about. Employers kind of freak out about it because in normal times, it requires that you give 60 days of advance notice prior to the layoff, or face substantial penalties if you don't give the notices in that time frame. But one of the emergency measures that came out over the last couple weeks is that Governor Newsom added some language to our California WARN Act that allows businesses to claim what's called the unforeseen business circumstances exception. And if this isn't an unforeseen business circumstance, I don't know what is. So employers are allowed to say, due to this sudden dramatic, drop in my business caused by these stay-at-home orders, I couldn't give 60 days notice. 60 days ago, I had no idea this was going to happen. So you don't have to give 60 days notice. Instead, you have to give notice as soon as practicable, which means basically the same day that you're doing the layoffs or the furloughs, frankly. And the notice itself is really just a letter. It's a letter to the employees and a letter to certain city, county, and state officials. Certain very specific things need to be included in there, which I'm not going to get into those details. And it does require some customization, but it really is nothing that's very onerous at all. And there are steep penalties for not doing it. So there really is no downside to sending the WARN notices. If you're kind of on the bubble and you're not sure whether or not it applies, I recommend that you send them because, again, there's no downside in doing it, but there are steep penalties if you don't do it. Okay, so finally, and I'm not going to get into any detail here because this is more of a tax lawyer thing, and I only know enough kind of to be dangerous. But the stimulus bill, the CARES Act, one of the goals of that is to help defray the costs of all of this for employers and to encourage employers not to lay off workers. So in addition to the tax credits, there are other things that are available to you right now. There's a payroll tax extension that might be available. And there's a variety of different types of loans that are available, some completely forgivable if you meet the conditions. But the conditions can impact your planning. So they're not available to everyone and they're not attractive to everyone. But if it's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to talk to your CPA or tax lawyer to get more information on what kind of help you can get in this time. So that's kind of the end of my formal presentation. We send out multiple alerts a day on this step. Well, I shouldn't say multiple alerts. We send out one email a day that includes multiple alerts within it on all of this stuff. And if anyone wants to be added to the distribution list, you can just email me and I'd be happy to add you to that, and you'll get our emails with all sorts of different updates. And my email address is T and then my last name, BROSNAN @swlaw.com. So again, that's the end of the formal presentation. If there's some kind of general questions that I didn't touch on, I'd be happy to try and help.
Tiffany, thank you so much. This is just so helpful. 3 of the people chatted and said that they have questions. So Amy has a question, so I'm going to let Amy Lakin go first.
Sorry, I'm scrolling back to see what my question was.
Documentation.
Oh, yes, thank you. So when you were explaining the paid sick leave and EFMLA, is documentation required for an individual to prove that they were quarantined or required to self-isolate or anything like that to care for themselves or a family member?
Yeah, there's documentation that's required for the sick leave component. The documentation is not required for the family leave component of it. The problem is, and this was something I looked into today, so maybe it's changed in the last couple of hours, but the IRS still hadn't said what documentation it is that they're going to require. So that's part of the guidance that's supposed to come out this week. We haven't seen it yet, but yes, you're going to be required to have some sort of documentation. I think it's likely, to essentially be things like the employee's name, the reason for taking the leave, how long the leave is extending for, and the name of the doctor or healthcare practitioner, sort of things. But we don't know yet for sure what it's going to require.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Nisha had asked if you could repeat a website. And
Oh, sure.
Nisha, feel free to chime in. And
I think I got the answer. Somebody else on the Zoom call actually sent it to me in the private chat. It was the labor website, the labor.ca front coronavirus thing. I got it. Thank you so much.
Got it. Yeah, so that's the state one that has a lot of helpful information for California employers about the benefits that might be available to employees.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we will be sending this out, so you'll be able to hear the links again. Ryan had a question?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to be laying off an employee on Wednesday, which is April 1st, and paying through that day. So my first question is, will that person be eligible for the Family's First Act benefits, I guess, because she's working as of April 1st?
She would only be available, she would only be able to take it on April 1st. If she's going to be notified on April 1st that that's her last day of employment and she's being laid off, once she's laid off, the rights to the benefits are cut off.
Okay.
So theoretically,
Okay.
she could call you tonight and say, oh, I'm taking one day of leave for whatever reason, and you would have to pay her for that. But then it would end as soon as she's notified of the layoff.
Okay. And the other question is just clarification on compensation for that, because let's say the work week starts on Monday and we're paying this person, we're laying this person off on Wednesday. So there's 3 days into the new pay period. I had planned on just breaking the salary down to whatever the hourly rate is and paying for 24 hours. But do I understand correctly? I would need to pay for 1 week of salary?
That's a great clarifying question. So, and I should have mentioned that earlier. No, one of the exceptions to paying the full week of salary for an exempt employee is when it's either the start or the end of employment. So if they are ending employment, meaning being laid off, as opposed to just, oh, we don't have any more work this week, we'll see you next week. If you're ending employment, you can do the pro rata share of the salary through tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Janae?
Yes, hello. So I had two questions. One, you mentioned that an employee can claim workman's comp if they catch the virus from another employee. So those of us who are in shelter services, can they also claim that if they catch it from a client?
I think it's likely. I mean, that would be a question that I would ask your broker. I don't do much when it comes to workers comp, but I think, yeah, I think it's likely that they were exposed to it at work, whether it be from a coworker or someone else. I think it's quite possible.
So then,
check with your broker.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. I actually was on the phone with Brian Mills yesterday for about 2 hours. So he mentioned something about, like, if an employee catches this virus and notifies us that they've tested positive, what are our requirements to sharing that with other staff members, and is there a requirement for sharing that with OSHA? Like how big and how wide does that get? Because I envision potentially having all of my employees having to go home to be isolated for 2 weeks and then nobody to run the shelter programs.
Yeah, that's possible. And there are protocols that the CDC and the Fed OSHA and Cal OSHA publish dealing with those kind of situations. And that's what we're advising clients, that you follow the guidance from the CDC and OSHA and Cal-OSHA. But yeah, it's quite what you envision is possible, unfortunately.
That's why I don't sleep at night sometimes.
Right.
Thanks.
Sure.
Adolfo has a question. Adolfo, are you still on?
Sorry, guys, I was trying to figure out how to unmute it. So my question, I think I wrote it down. I'm trying to read it to ensure I read it.
If they're high risk.
If we have an employee that says they're high risk and they want to stop working until the restrictions from the state have been lifted, do we have to provide her the time and protect her job?
That's one of those areas that is a little bit unclear at the moment. But if you look closely at the language of the paid sick leave component or the family leave component, we know that that reason is not something that would qualify for the 10 weeks of paid family leave. And it doesn't sound like it quite qualifies for one of the reasons under the paid sick leave, because she isn't actually sick and she doesn't have a diagnosis. She's just, high risk and concerned about not being able to work. Now, if she gets a doctor's note, you may be looking at just kind of your traditional disability leave. If the doctor is saying because of this medical condition, she's unable to work, you may have to look at it from that perspective. That,
it sounds to me like we might be better off like engaging in an interactive process with like an ADA claim, like an ADA leave.
Yeah, it sounds like it. If she, again, is not saying that she's actually sick or seeking a diagnosis, but that she has some other condition and is being advised not to work by a doctor.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Mark. And we're 4:46. Tiffany, are you okay with a few more questions?
Yep, I'm fine.
Okay. Just put your hand up when you're done.
Well, that was a perfect segue from Adolfo's question, because if there's an employee that's in the high risk category and has a medical note to not be physically at work and work from home is not an option, I was curious if that is considered as a quarantine notice, or if it's just and I haven't thought about the disability aspect of it, but it sounds like it's more of the disability route for this.
I think it's more of the disability route is what we think now. And again, this changes all the time. Under the current guidelines, I think it's just the disability that you're going to have to consider there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Rochelle.
Okay, I have a question about our employees working from home. And we're fortunate that we can all work from home, so everybody's doing it. And now we're looking at, okay, well then just continue to work from home until April. My question is now equipment. Are we obligated, because most of the staff have laptops. And when we first sent people home, there were a couple who said, no, I'm good, I've got my own thing. In the likelihood they say, well now, I'm going to be working from home for 2 months, I want a new laptop. It seems like it's a minor expense. Should we go ahead and pay for the equipment because they are doing it for work?
If they don't have one and you're requiring them to use them, then the answer is yes.
Well, I mean, they're using their own at home. And so,
Right.
So that's what I was wondering. I was a little uncomfortable because we had one unhappy employee and it's now making me question all kinds of stuff. But I thought, should I force them, you're going to get a laptop whether you ask for it or not, so that we don't have a claim later on that, we did not treat them fairly.
One thing I'm seeing some employers do is you kind of come up with their best estimate as to kind of what the average expenses might be when you think of cell phone bill, internet service, those sort of things, and say, okay, we're going to have a $100 a month stipend to cover your expenses related to working from home. If you have expenses that are above that, please let us know and provide, documentation and support for requests for anything above that. But, we've
Okay.
determined that this
Well,
is
that's a good point. So then if we do that, do we just come up with a general statement and it goes out to all the staff, as a blanket thing so that everybody knows that, if you're using your own cell phone and laptop and whatever, we're going to do a credit of this much per month?
Yes, and as long as you kind of have the let us know if you think it's more, and you're gonna have to provide us documentation.
All right.
We think this is
Perfect.
reasonable.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Patricia? Patricia, are you still there? Let me see if I can go back to my question that she.
Sorry, yes, I was trying to unmute because I was in the chat section. I apologize.
Okay.
So my question is for furloughs. My understanding, and I could be wrong, or maybe I misunderstood on a different training, is that furloughs are only good for up to 2 weeks or 1 pay period. After that, we would then have to either terminate or lay off.
There is no hard and fast rule for the length of a furlough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no rule or length of time restriction. Okay. I might have misunderstood then.
Well, there's some,
Okay.
it may have come up because there's some thinking that if a furlough is less than 2 weeks, you don't have to give them their final pay. So maybe it tied into that, but the best practice is, regardless of the length of time, if you're calling it a furlough, treat it as if it's like a final pay event and give them their accrued PTO and vacation and all of that.
Okay, so even if it's just temporary, just for 2 weeks, because that may be an option for us at the center. So if we did decide to just for 2 weeks, then we would have to pay them out vacation even though they're coming back?
That's the conservative approach. It's not in one of those areas that's not entirely clear.
Okay. But if I did it for 1 week, then I don't need to do that safely.
We believe so.
Okay. Okay. So it's unclear.
Okay. Allison?
Okay. Thank you.
Allison, can you hear us? She might be unmuting. We'll go to Linda for now, and then we'll come back to Allison. Linda?
Okay, my question is, what is the best approach to announcing to employees that their hours are going to be reduced when you don't know how long this is going to last?
Yeah, I mean, this is not, there's no legal answer to that. Transparency is kind of the best way to deal with things. I'm finding, and I'm hearing from other employers and other HR professionals, that you just be as honest as possible. Yeah, there's no real legal answer to that one.
I have Allison. She doesn't have a mic. Forgive me if it's already been answered. I don't have a mic, so I can't ask. Does FFCRA supersede SDI? In other words, FFCRA takes the place of SDI.
I don't believe that you could get both at the same time. And I don't know the answer to whether, you have to first take the FFCRA leave before you would be entitled to the SDI. So sorry, don't quite know that one.
And Janae had a follow-up question.
Yeah, so I'm curious, we've considered the idea of offering hazard pay to some of our, actually our entry-level positions are the ones that are on the ground with our clients the most, our service coordinators. And so we've tossed around the idea of offering hazard pay, but obviously we don't want to jack somebody's hourly pay rate up $3 to $5 an hour forever. But I do feel like there should be some kind of compensation for those that are coming to work and being on the ground with our clients. How do we best position that? How do we propose it? How do we keep it from being like a contagious disease that goes around all our employees?
Right.
How do we come back off it when things are back to normal?
Yeah, I think you need to be perfectly clear if you're doing that this is on a temporary basis because of these crazy, unusual conditions. And it's only going to be offered during a limited time for very specific circumstances. And once we get back to normal, employees are going back to their regular rate. A way to do it that's a little kind of loosey-goosey, that might not make the employees as happy, is to do just like a discretionary bonus rather than it's an official like pay raise. You could treat it as just a, one time or a couple times in a month bonus. Thanks so much for putting yourself out there and working hard during these crazy times. We're going to give you a bonus of X.
How do I make that equitable? And if I offer it to one employee in one job category, am I going to have to offer it to any employee in any job category?
Yeah, you don't have to do that for everyone, and you certainly can designate the specific positions that are eligible for that. All of the normal rules regarding discrimination could come into play. If, for example, the only people that end up being qualified for this are, white women over 40, then someone could claim, well, I didn't get this because I'm not a white woman over 40, or whatever the case might be. So as long as you're mindful of that, and if you're doing it for truly objective categories, then you shouldn't have a problem with that, and you can pick and choose.
Okay, thank you.
This is Ryan at Thomas House. Just to touch on what you're just saying with Janae, at Thomas House, we did look at it like from this point of view of doing bonuses, but they weren't associated with job titles. It was with tasks. So anyone on the team that could step in, wanted to step in and do something that was normally outside of their normal job duties, if they wanted to come in for a certain hour period of time to accomplish a task, then they received a bonus for that task. So anyone was eligible regardless of their job title.
Yeah, that'd be another great way that's objective. You do this task, you get the bonus, and that can't be considered discriminatory as long as it's open to everyone.
All right. Well, Tiffany, thank you. It's almost exactly an hour, and I think I speak for everybody how valuable this was. So,
Robin, I'm so sorry. Before we leave, I have one more follow-up question
oh
to
my
Janette's question.
goodness. Okay.
Because if we do provide hazard, I'm sorry, I put it in the chat section.
Sorry.
If we do provide hazard pay, do we have to have employees sign something, or will a simple memo stating effective this day, ending upon restrictions lifting, was that enough, or should we have employees sign something acknowledging the fact that they understand that hazard pay is for a short amount of time?
A simple memo is fine. You're not required to have a signature on that. But that being said, a signature is the best proof that someone actually received it, so they can't later say, well, I didn't know that this was going to end. So if you get a signature, that's great. Or if you have the ability to just send a blast email that goes to everyone, you could have kind of quote unquote proof that we sent the email on this date. Your name was in the to line and everyone got it, is another way. Yeah.
All righty. Thank you very much. That was all. Appreciate all the help.
I will, Tiffany, it's TBROSNAN at
SWLAW.com.
Okay. Thank you again.
Can I say something really quick?
Really quick.
If anybody wants a copy of the recording of this, email me and I will send it to you. And I'm Robin, R-O-B-I-N-S, at fieldstoneleadership.org. We've recorded this, and if you want a copy, you just email me and I'll send it to you.
Tiffany, again, thank you so much.
You're
on behalf of
welcome.
all of
Thanks,
us.
everybody.
Everybody stay well, stay home, and stay in touch.
Take care. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Lisa's.
I just removed her. I love the power. It's so much fun. I mute people.
Well, the reason why I said that instead of just saying we'll send it to everyone, there's a couple people on there I don't have their emails. I think.
But don't you automatically get that when they sign up because of through their account?
I don't know where to find that. I'm sure that Ryan person I didn't know. I'm sure.
Ryan was at our COO thing. That's how I know him.
Oh,
So
and who was the girl in the corner? Elle Johnson.
Oh, I don't know who she was. Yeah, her name.
I'm guessing that somebody sent that to her and said, "Here, go on and listen to this."
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, yeah, I didn't know who Ryan was, and I'm thinking there's a couple people in here. I could write everybody's name down, but I don't know. Well, it's easier to just say if you want it, let me know.
I didn't know if there's a way to. Oh God, we're recording still.